Modern construction teaches us that wood must be sealed, painted, or chemically treated, or it will rot. But, medieval builders would have disagreed entirely. They built homes, barns, bridges, and cathedrals from untreated timber that still stands today, centuries later, often outperforming modern replacements installed beside it. They did this without paint, without tar, and without chemical preservatives. Their success came from an understanding of wood that modern building culture largely abandoned. Once you see how they stopped rot at its source, the logic becomes impossible to ignore. Medieval builders focused on moisture control instead of surface protection. Rot does not begin because wood is old. It begins because moisture is trapped. Medieval builders learned early that sealing wood tightly often made rot worse, not better. Instead of coating timber to block water entirely, they designed structures that allowed wood to shed moisture and dry quickly. Their goal was not waterproofing, but breathability. By keeping wood dry internally, they removed the conditions fungi and bacteria need to survive. Timber selection and cutting time, played a critical role. Medieval builders did not cut trees randomly. Timber was often felled in winter when sap levels were lowest. Lower sap meant fewer sugars, and fewer sugars meant less food for rot organisms. Trees were chosen for tight grain and slow growth, which honestly naturally resisted moisture movement. This alone dramatically extended the life of the wood before any construction even began. Slow seasoning was the first and most important anti-rot step. Fresh wood was never used immediately. Logs and beams were seasoned for months or years in shaded, ventilated areas. They were stacked off the ground to prevent ground moisture from wicking upward. This slow drying allowed internal moisture to escape evenly, preventing cracks while stabilizing the wood. These days, modern builders, they almost always skip this step, pretty much relying on chemical treatments to make up for it. But, you see, medieval builders knew that seasoning was absolutely non-negotiable. Medieval buildings were in fact designed so water could never sit on wood for long. Roof overhangs were, quite generous. Beams were raised off stone foundations using air gaps. Vertical posts were often mounted on stone plinths, not just buried in soil. And joints were shaped specifically to shed water naturally, rather than trap it. These design choices meant timber rarely stayed wet long enough for rot to even begin. Airflow was, in a sense, treated as a preservation tool. Floors were raised to allow air circulation underneath. Walls were built with cavities that let moisture escape. And roof spaces, they were ventilated naturally. Medieval builders understood that moving air dried wood faster than any coating ever could. This passive drying system protected timber continuously, without maintenance. In some regions, builders used light surface charring or smoke exposure, not as a coating, but as a stabilizer. Smoke deposits antimicrobial compounds into the wood while driving out residual moisture. Light charring alters the surface chemistry, making it less hospitable to fungi. This was not done to every piece of timber, but it was used strategically where moisture exposure was unavoidable. Modern treatments focus on killing organisms rather than removing their habitat. Once coatings crack or chemicals leach out, rot accelerates. Medieval builders removed moisture, sugars and stagnation. Wood preserved this way does not suddenly fail. It degrades slowly, predictably, and often remains structurally sound long after modern materials have collapsed. You know, this approach is still usable even today. If you are building with wood outdoors, start by letting timber dry thoroughly before use. Avoid sealing all sides with modern coatings. Instead, design structures so water drains naturally and air can circulate freely. Raise wood off soil and concrete. Use overhangs and, well, allow joints to breathe. If, additional protection is needed, it's best to use smoke exposure or maybe a bit of light charring, rather than relying on those impermeable coatings. The goal is always the same, really. Dry wood stays alive longer. Raised garden beds, well, they just last longer when the boards are elevated a bit and allowed to dry out between rains. Shed walls stay rot-free when spaced off the ground with airflow behind them. Tool handles survive decades when properly seasoned and allowed to breathe rather than sealed under thick varnish. Off-grid cabins built with airflow and overhangs require less maintenance than chemically treated alternatives. They understood that wood is not plastic. It moves, breathes, and responds to its environment. Preservation is not about freezing wood in place, but allowing it to function naturally without staying wet. Medieval builders did not stop rot with products. They stopped it with patience, design, and respect for materials. If you value this kind of deep, practical history, subscribe to In the Beginning. Share this with fellow history buffs, builders, and survivalists who care about methods that actually work. These techniques protected timber for centuries once, and they still can today.